The freighter neared Isle Royale like any other voyage before. She'd been in rough situations before, and her early career had been unlucky, but at this point, this voyage seemed normal. Around 4 a.m., unfortunately, disaster would strike, and the Emperor found herself in a perilous situation. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. For some important background information, the first iron-hulled vessel built on the Great Lakes was the gunship USS Michigan, and she'd be renamed USS Wolverine in 1905. In the mid-1840s, Canadian companies began importing iron vessels prefabricated by shipyards in the United Kingdom. The first iron-hulled merchant ship built on the Great Lakes, called Merchant, was constructed in 1862. Despite her success, wood was still the preferred material up until about the 1880s due to their lower cost and the abundance of timber in the area. In the early 1880s, shipyards on the Great Lakes finally saw how awesome iron-hulled ships can be and started constructing them on a relatively large scale. Throughout the 1880s, the iron ore trade on the Great Lakes grew exponentially, primarily due to the increasing size of lake freighters and the rise in the numbers of trips made by ore boats to the ore docks of Lake Superior. As the railways were unable to keep up with the rapid production of iron ore, most of it was transported by the bulk freighters made of it. This is where Emperor comes in. SS Emperor was built in Collingwood, Ontario between 1910 and 1911 by Collingwood Shipbuilding Company for Inland Line, her first owner. She was built as hull number 28 and launched on December 17, 1910, being christened by James Playfair of Midland, Ontario, the manager of the Inland Line and entrepreneur. He was known for naming his ships after royalty. She was completed and ready to start her career in April of 1911, and when she was completed, she became the largest Canadian ship built to that date, earning her the nickname the Pride of Canada. She was built exclusively to keep up the iron ore trade. Before we get any further into her story, let's take a look at her specs. Emperor, Canadian official number 126654, was an iron-hulled lake freighter with her tonnages sitting at 7,031 gross registered tons and 5,048 net registered tons. She was 525 feet long overall, 504 feet long between her perpendiculars, had a beam of 56.1 feet wide, a draft of 27 feet deep, and a depth of 31 feet deep. She was built with an arch and webs frame system designed to create an unobstructed cargo hold with 30 latches. This cargo hold was divided into 5 separate compartments, each with 6 hatches and a capacity of 2,000 long tons. Her total cargo capacity sat at 10,000 long tons with an ore chute at each hatch for easy loading. Emperor had 11 bulkheads as well as 7 side ballast and bilge tanks, which were connected with 7 steel pipes so she could take on and offload water very quickly. Her pilot house, the captain's and mate's quarters were all at the bow, and the crew's quarters were located at the stern. As for propulsion, Emperor was powered by a 2,200 horsepower, 82 RPM triple expansion steam engine. Steam for the engine was provided by 2 coal-fired, single-ended 180 pound per square inch Scotch Marine boilers. This setup turned 1 fixed-pitch propeller. The engine and boilers were both built by the Collingwood Shipbuilding Company, and she had a registered nominal speed of 10 knots. She wasn't the fastest ship on the Great Lakes, but you can be the fastest to subscribe. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel below for more content, and let me know down in the comments section. Alright, let's get into her career. After successful sea trials in the Georgian Bay, Inland Lines accepted the Emperor. Her maiden voyage kicked off on May 3, 1911, sailing upbound without cargo. While upbound on Lake Huron on May 17th, she broke her propeller shaft in Thunder Bay. She was towed to Detour, Michigan by the package freighter Superior, after which she was towed to Port Arthur, Ontario for repairs. On June 16, 1911, the Canada Steamship Lines took over ownership. On October 18, 1911, Emperor was heading from Fort William, Ontario for Midland with 310,000 bushels of wheat. While anchoring below the Canadian lock at the Sioux Locks, she overrode her anchor, tearing a hole in her bow and sank into 20 feet of water just 400 feet below the lower entry. Her stern went against the north pier, while her bow swung 100 feet into the channel, blocking it. She was raised on May 19th, and after temporary repairs were made, she was taken to Midland. After an inquiry, it was determined that the canal employees were to blame for the sinking, as they flooded the lock without checking if Emperor was ready. The court further stated that it believed it was, quote, customary for the master of a vessel to sound one blast of the whistle as a signal to the canal authorities to begin flooding. Also that it, quote, thinks it is extremely necessary the masters of all vessels should have copies of the regulations governing the operations of locks and canals. Emperor's officers were acquitted of any wrongdoing as her captain was not on the bridge at the time, and the blame was placed on the watchman. So far, Emperor is off to a rough start. And the bad luck would only continue. While bound for a Lake Superior port, Emperor ran aground on Point aux Pins on the north shore of Lake Erie on the morning of May 29, 1914. She was pulled off the next day by tugs. She ran aground yet again on October 29, 1926 near Mackinac City, Michigan on Major Shoal. She was freed at 4 p.m. after jettisoning 886 long tons of iron ore. Sometime before 1932, she reportedly ran aground yet again on an unknown object near Michopitan Island on her way to Fort William. While bound for Thunder Bay with 8,858 long tons of coal on the night of November 24, 1936, Emperor encountered a heavy storm. This was typical for November on the lakes, and still is. While she was passing between Passage Island and Lamb Island, she lost her rudder. Emperor spent November 25th drifting in the storm. The tug James Whalen was sent to help her, but before help arrived, the canaler Renvoil arrived on the scene and towed Emperor to Fort William. One of the Emperor's deckhands was swept overboard in the storm, and unfortunately drowned. On May 4, 1937, Emperor was headed from Port Weller, Ontario for Hamilton with a cargo of iron ore she loaded in Ashland, Wisconsin. Conditions on Lake Ontario were foggy, which caused her to miss the port turn, which would then have put her on a course to the piers of the Burlington Canal at the entrance to Hamilton Harbor. However, she carried on, eventually running aground near Bronte, Ontario at 11 p.m. A tug and a barge arrived from Kingston, Ontario to free her. A portion of her cargo was removed first, then she was refloated on May 6th, having sustained hardly any damage. In the spring of 1940, Emperor's first mate, James A. Morey, fell overboard from one of the bridge wings. He sustained no serious injuries. She had an incredibly unlucky start to her career, and she'd unfortunately have a very unlucky end. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright folks, it's time to get into her final voyage. After unloading a cargo of coal in Fort William on June 3, 1947, she headed to the Canadian National Railway ore dock in Port Arthur, and here she loaded 10,264 long tons of iron ore from the Steep Rock Mine. The loading of the ore took 6 to 7 hours. She left Port Arthur for Ashtabula, Ohio at 10:55 p.m. under the command of Captain Eldon Walkinshaw. 2 of her 35-man crew were left behind at Fort William, rounding out the crew at 33 men. The weather was nice. There was little wind and visibility was clear that evening. At midnight, Walkinshaw handed over the watch duties to his first mate, James A. Morey, who had supervised the loading of the iron ore earlier. He then went to bed, not suspecting disaster would strike in a few short hours. The hours between midnight and about 4 a.m. were calm and as expected. They began to approach the northeast point of Isle Royale when disaster would strike. Emperor crashed into canoe rocks with a loud bang, the ship coming to a sudden halt and the sound of bending metal echoing throughout the vessel. She broke in two at this point. Just 10 minutes after impact, Walkinshaw, who'd been startled awake, gave the order to abandon ship. By that time, she'd already developed a horrendous list. The starboard side lifeboat successfully launched, but was leaking due to the absence of a bilge plug. The port boat capsized when it was sucked under by Emperor as she sank. According to the night steward, the cold water rushing into the ship hit the hot boilers and they exploded, only adding to the chaos. We'll get more into that later. She sank in just 20 to 35 short minutes, disappearing under the waters of Lake Superior. The United States Coast Guard cutter Kimball, which was maintaining navigation lights in the vicinity of Blake Point, intercepted an SOS signal from Emperor and arrived on the scene in 35 minutes, just after the ship had disappeared. Kimball transported the 21 survivors and the body of cook Evelyn Schultz to Fort William, then traveling back to the scene of the accident to search for more survivors and bodies. Canada Steamship Lines also chartered the excursion boat Coastal Queen to assist in the search. However, bad weather prevented diver E.J. Fowler, who was on board Coastal Queen, from reaching the wreckage. In total, 12 lost their lives in the sinking of the Emperor. May they all rest in peace. I wish the families nothing but the best. The investigation into Emperor's sinking proved to be difficult, as Walkinshaw, Maury, and helmsman J. Prokop all died. An investigation carried out by the Department of Transport blamed Maury, who they claimed, quote, did not keep proper watch prior to the sinking of Emperor. They determined that Maury, who was supposed to be on watch duty until 6 a.m., was likely sleep-deprived at the time of the grounding, and had not made the usual navigational checks Emperor would have required to pass safely between Isle Royale and Passage Island. The courts criticized the prevailing system, quote, which required the first mate to be in charge of the loading of the ship during the period when he should have been off duty, resulted in his becoming overly tired, suffering as he was from a lack of sleep. Furthermore, Prokop, who was unacquainted with that part of Lake Superior, failed to detect the error in Emperor's course. Also criticized were the usage of wooden lifeboats and the lack of lifeboat drills performed on board Emperor in 1947. The Board of Investigation fully exonerated Captain Walkinshaw, stating that, quote, under all circumstances he did everything possible most promptly and efficiently. They also praised the captain and crew of Kimball for the rescue of the survivors. Ultimately, this was a systematic problem that led to a really terrible outcome. Emperor was the final and second largest shipwreck to occur at Isle Royale. She was also the largest shipwreck to have occurred on Lake Superior since the loss of the freighter Chester A. Congdon in 1918, and the deadliest since the sinking of the Canaler Kamloops in 1927, both at Isle Royale. I've seen some requests for that one, so if you'd like to see an episode on Chester A. Congdon or Kamloops, let me know down in the comments. In 1948, Canada's Steamship Lines replaced Emperor with the freighter Burlington. As for her wreckage, the first dives took place on June 12, 1947. They were conducted by the originally intended diver E.J. Fowler, who made a total of 3 roughly 30-minute dives to the wreck. The Emperor rests in between 25 feet of water at her bow and 175 feet of water at her stern, in 2 partially attached sections. The bow has sustained severe damage, mostly due to the impact of ice, while the stern is still intact. The bow section stretches from 25 feet to 80 feet down, where the intact stern section then starts and runs to 175 feet down. In the bow section, there are 2 7,000-pound anchors, a windlass and chain locker, as well as 5 relatively intact cargo hatches. The stern features an intact and penetrable engine room, an intact mast, and partially intact cabin. Remember when the night steward said the boilers had exploded? Well, they were found completely intact, so his theory was proven wrong. The roof on the port side of the cabin has partially collapsed, as the funnel fell on top of it with sufficient force to not only damage the roof, but also the bulkhead. There are 17 intact cargo hatches aft of the break in the hull. The propeller blades broke off as she sank, leaving only the propeller hub and rudder. Her cargo holds still contain her cargo of iron ore. Wreckage from the Canaler Dunelm, which ran aground in 1910 but was freed, lies 100 yards east of Emperor's Bow. In 1975, sport divers from the Inland Divers Club of Duluth, Minnesota, discovered the preserved remains of a crew member near Emperor's engine room and reported it to the National Park Service. This next part is graphic, so just warning you. The body was missing its eyes, nose, and arms from the elbow down. It was photographed by divers and subsequently appeared in Luke Clyburn's documentary film Angels of the Sea. In order to deter potential looters, the remains were later reportedly sunk at the end of the stern by Canadian divers. Though unverified, several other bodies are reported to have been found. In 1988, a diver reported encountering an apparition of a sailor in a crew cabin, where the ghost seemed to make eye contact with the diver. Another diver claimed to have heard a metallic voice saying "die" twice while on a dive. Additionally, a diver allegedly came across what appeared to be the ghost of a member of the engine room crew, who seemed unconcerned with the dirt and muck in the engine room and was focused on checking the equipment. Divers have also reported hearing the sounds of the ship's engine on multiple occasions. This would be a very haunting and terrifying experience. The Emperor's Wreck was listed on the National Register of Historic Places on June 12, 1984. Between 1980 and 1985, Emperor was the second most popular shipwreck at Isle Royale National Park, behind the excursion steamer America. However, as of 2009, she is Isle Royale's most frequently visited shipwreck, accounting for over 350 of the 1,062 dives made to the wrecks in the park that year. The Ro-Ro ferry left Manila like any other morning, packed with people and heading for her destination in eastern Visayas. Though all seemed as though it would go as planned, Typhoon Unsung would have different plans for this ship and her passengers. On next week's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we explore the fate of the MV Doña Marilyn.